Hi there. Welcome to our first lecture in Concepts of Biology. We're going to do this lecture in this video format where I basically talk you through, we're just going to do the first chapter in this particular video. And what you'll want to do first is kind of orient yourself with where we are in the lecture, this being the first one. We're just going to refer to chapter 1 in your textbook, which starts on page 15 in the Essentials of the Living World textbook, which looks like this guy. And I'd also direct you to double check the syllabus, have that next to you, and if you'd like, you could always do a printout of the posted PowerPoint that I have associated with chapter 1. So the first question I'm going to ask you is, what is life? So if in the word biology you break it down into its roots, bio refers to life, and ology is the study of. So you have the study of life. But before we can kind of get anywhere in this journey of the course together, we need to define at least our first term, and then we'll go from there. So if I ask you what is life, you know, what comes to mind? Maybe things like animals and plants. But what about things that, you know, might seem to be living, but maybe science wouldn't really say that they are? So I'll give you a couple items or things to try to categorize into living or not living. So if I say the word bird, tree, car, cat, an orange, a computer, and a virus. Not a computer virus, but like the virus that makes you sick, gives you a cold, or gives you the flu. How would you categorize each of those words? I'm guessing that you would probably say a bird is living. You'd probably also say tree and cat. And orange, well, just the orange itself, is that living or non-living? The computer kind of behaves like it's alive, but science probably, biology probably wouldn't say that it's living. And then a virus. Well, viruses can reproduce. They have genetic material. Do they live? Do they die? Well, how do we know? So once we start to kind of categorize what we think is living and non-living, now we have to try to validate our categorizations. So what characteristics can you think of to categorize the living organisms that we've decided they're living in? We want to now support the fact that they are. So we said bird, tree, cat. Maybe the tree the orange came from, maybe the orange, we're not sure. What do all of those things have in common? This is where I'd like you to come up with a short list, a long list, whatever you can think of. You've probably come up with things like, well, the bird and the tree and the cat. Well, the bird and the tree, the bird and the cat eat things, and the tree eats carbon dioxide, right? And they all use water, and they all live and die at some point, and they all reproduce. What else do you have in your list? What do you not have for maybe some of the other things? Viruses, well, do they eat? Kind of. Do they maintain a stable internal environment within themselves, like the tree, the cat, and the bird do? If you're kind of stuck right now and looking for some support, you want to look at page 17 in your book. This is what biologists have come up with as the characteristics or properties of life. So these are things like cellular organization. So, you know, scientists say at this time, you know, spring of 2015, this is where we are, they say that, you know, all living things are made of cells, and the cell is the smallest unit of life. So viruses are actually not made of cells. They have some genetic material, DNA or RNA, and then they're surrounded by a protein coat. So they're not actually surrounded by a cell membrane, and they don't have a nucleus and organelles like cells do. The second characteristic of life, metabolism. That is the sum of all chemical reactions occurring in an organism or in a cell, if that cell is the organism, at a given time and over the course of its life. The third characteristic is homeostasis. So this means that an organism is maintaining a stable internal environment amidst changing external conditions. So an example in humans would be, if we're cold, we can do other things, like we can put on long sleeve shirts and hats and gloves and all of that, but we'll start to do a couple things inside of ourselves first. We might start to shiver, and in that case, we're trying to conserve the heat in our blood and keep it towards our torso and our core, as opposed to out in our appendages where heat can be lost really easily. Another facet of homeostasis is that the organism can respond to stimuli. So for example, in humans, if I were to shut the lights off, my pupils would do what? And you can try this at home. In the room where you're sitting, just shut the lights off, have a mirror next to yourself, or have someone check your pupils, and flip the lights on right away, and see what you notice that your pupils are doing. They're actually responding to an external stimulus in a manner to try to keep your homeostasis at equilibrium. So what homeostasis means, if we look at those roots again, homeo or homo just means same, and stasis or static is the opposite of dynamic, so it means same also. So it's like same. The fourth facet or property of life is growth and reproduction. So human growth and development, growth and reproduction, goes from embryo to the point of death and everything that happens along the way. Another example, which you might be familiar with, are trees, right? So we've got the oak tree as the acorn. We plant it, we give it warmth and water, and we look at its little primary root coming out, and then its root hairs, and it grows up into a little sapling, and then to a mature tree, if it makes it that far. The fifth property of life is heredity. All organisms have some kind of genetic reproductive material, whether it's DNA or RNA, and they have a means to pass on that material to their progeny or offspring from generation through generation. So if you'd like a little bit more detail on that, page 17 has some great info for you, and it's all lined out there. I want to pull back a little bit for a second from talking about biology and getting a little bit more into the umbrella of what biology and more broad, what science really is. So like I was saying earlier, where we need to know what the words mean that we're talking about. Science, it's almost like learning another language. So, you're not signed up for a Spanish class, you're signed up for a biology class, but it might as well be another language in and of itself. So where I want to go with this idea is I want to ask you what you think science is and what really is science. So this is something called the nature of science, or the NOS. And I'd like to give this concept to you in the form of a diagram. So we're going to use a tree, all types of puns intended there. This is the nature of science tree. It's kind of the tree of life too, because it's focused on biology. This tree has 4 branches. These branches are going to cover the 4 major themes of biology that we're going to study this year. So we have a cell theory or cell branch. We have a gene branch. We have a heredity branch. And last but certainly not least, we have the evolution branch. We're going to spend approximately equal amounts of time this semester covering each of the branches, and then, to go further with the analogy here, the little subsequent tiny little branches and twigs poking off of each major branch. So those are the main themes of our course, but this tree would be nothing without its roots. So this tree has 6 roots. These roots are the 6 tenets of the nature of science. All right, so the 6 roots that the NOS Tree of Life has make a not easy to remember acronym called CONPTT. So it's CONPTT, standing for consistent, observable, natural, testable, tentative, and predictable. I said the predictable out of order there, sorry about that. So if something is scientifically related, it will adhere to all of those 6 roots. And if it's related to biology, it's going to adhere somehow, or in some manner, I should say, to all the 4 branches. So that is our NOS Tree of Life. Now I ask you, and this is going to sound kind of weird at first, the question I have for you is, how many angels, not angles, not math, angles, how many angels can you fit on a pinhead? How many angels can you fit on a pinhead? Well, I mean, maybe 1, maybe none. I mean, I don't know how big they are, right? Have you ever seen an angel? Have other people seen angels? Can everyone see them? Well, how do you measure one? What we could do to approach this question is bring in our reference point of the Tree of Life, or specifically the roots. So I'll ask you this: are angels consistent? Well, even if I have seen one, I don't always see them at the same time, or maybe some people do. So, okay, consistent, question mark, we're not sure. What about observable? Well, certainly some people have seen them. Not all people. Another question mark. Natural. Are angels of the natural physical world, or are they of the metaphysical world? I think we would agree that they're not natural. What about testable? Can we test or run an experiment on an angel? I don't think so. Predictable. Can we predict where we think we'll see an angel, and then one actually shows up there? Maybe. I've never been able to do it. So, question mark? And last but not least, tentative. Tentative is kind of like innocent until proven guilty. So, are angels tentative? Some people think they exist, some people don't. But until, supported otherwise, well, they're probably tentative, huh? Well, how many angels on the tip of a pin, or on a pinhead? That question really is only supported, kind of, by 1 root and maybe a few halves. So unless a question can be fully supported by all 6 of these roots, then science has no business dealing with that question. Not to say that that question isn't valid in the realm of the universe, but it's just that science is ill-equipped to handle it. Along the lines of the Tree of Life, what is science? What do these words mean? What are the roots of these words, and what do I need to know about them? We're going to be dealing with a fair amount of misconceptions this semester, and one of the ones that relates to chapter 1 and then also relates a little bit farther on in chapter 4 and after that is the idea of a theory and a law. So when I had said, for tentative, I said innocent until proven guilty. In science, and this might sound weird, we don't prove things, but we support things that we've seen. So we make a prediction about something, we run an experiment or make observations, we collect that data, and that data either supports, or another way of saying that is validates, our original question or hypothesis, or it refutes, doesn't support, or invalidates that original question or statement. So we don't ever have wrong or right data. It's not correct or incorrect. We certainly may have human error in an experiment from time to time. But I want to get us away from saying prove, disprove, right, wrong, correct, incorrect. So along these lines, in science we have theories and we have laws. Scientific laws, right, are different than, laws enforced by the local or federal government. So just as there's the distinction there, there's also a distinction between scientific theories and personal theories. So personal theory would be like, well, it's sunny out right now, and so if it was February 2nd, the groundhog sees his shadow and there's going to be 6 more weeks of winter. Versus a scientific theory like the cell theory, the gene theory, heredity theory, and the theory of evolution. Scientific theories explain how something works. So scientific theories are the how. They explain processes, whereas scientific laws explain what happens. So laws are the what. Are scientific theories and scientific laws equally as valid or supported? Yeah, they definitely are. And that's another misconception, is that theories are kind of immature versions of laws, or they're not fully fleshed out and supported. And that's actually not the case. Both theories and laws are equally as valid and as supported as one another. It's just that they exist to explain different things. So in my example of explaining how versus explaining what. So a law is like a definition, like defining something, whereas how is explaining not just a definition, but going a little bit beyond that to explain to the point that we can see kind of a process over time. So keeping this distinction in mind is going to be really important for you this semester, in addition to our main topics and what science is, what the roots of it actually are. The next little activity I have for you is practice in looking at the really wide scope of biology. So in our short semester together, short in the sense that we really could use a lot longer than a semester to cover biology, we're going to look at not just the overview, but also some depth to it too. So I've come up with about a dozen or more terms for you, and if you can see these, I'll also have these posted. The terms are atoms, biomes, biospheres, cells, communities, ecosystems, macromolecules, molecules, organ systems, organelles, organisms, organs, populations, species, subatomic particles, and tissues. And so with these terms, which are currently in alphabetical order, we are going to explore, this journey of the semester together, founded in these things. So this activity that I'm going to have you do is an exercise in, what's the smallest of these terms, if we zoom way in, and then what are the largest of these words. This is really the scope of our class. We're not going to get below subatomic particles. Maybe we'll mention it a little bit, but that's not really going to be our focus. And then we're not going to get larger than biosphere. Bio is life, sphere, it's like a 3-dimensional circle, aka the Earth. So we're not going to get smaller than atoms. We're not going to zoom out farther than the Earth in our journey together. So take some time, approximately like 5 minutes, and see if you can take these terms and put them in an ordered list from smallest to largest. Once you have that list done, you're going to want to check on pages 18 and